Make yourself at home.
Good morning, everybody, and as the video said, a big welcome from me, Scott Matheson, here in Auckland, New Zealand, and we're wishing you well from wherever you are in the world this afternoon, or as most people seem to be in Western Europe or the UK, good evening. So our webinar today is specifically aimed at nurses and midwives who want to move to New Zealand in this really interesting time. There's a fantastic opportunity for people in healthcare to move to New Zealand, and we have two fantastic panelists today to guide you and give you a framework of how that can be done. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. Joe Bradshaw, if you could introduce yourself to the people on the webinar tonight, please.
Thank you very much, Scott. And actually, I just have to come out on the fact that obviously I love the fact that when you do a live webinar, you know, we all make mistakes. So it's good to be here and be live. So yes, as Scott said, I'm Joe Bradshaw. So I'm a healthcare international recruitment specialist. And you might be able to tell from my accent that I'm originally from the UK and came here from the lovely town of Blackpool about 20 years ago. And I also live in Auckland, which is where our head office is. And look, it's really exciting that all of you are, you know, thinking or planning your move to New Zealand. It's an absolutely great country. I've traveled the country, all the far corners of the country, beautiful place to live, great food, great people. So yeah, we'll do our best to help you get here. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, definitely got personal experience of migrating, as has our next panelist, our head of immigration and visas at Working In, is Zinni Cheng. Zinni.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Also, it is Chinese New Year, so happy Chinese New Year. So yes, I am Zinni. I'm a licensed immigration advisor here at Working In. I also manage the team. In total, we have 14 licensed advisors that are providing services. So most of us are migrants ourselves. I myself have been through that journey of migration. I migrated with my family to New Zealand almost 20 years ago now. So I know what it's like. I know it's a big process, and it's one that's you never turn back. So it's a great country to be in, and we look forward to helping you.
Thank you, Zinni. Thank you very much. And I think what we're saying here is that coming to New Zealand, migrating to New Zealand, is a significant movement in your life. It's not easy. It's not about just getting a job and getting on a plane and flying over here. The entire migration pathway is long, and it's challenging, and it requires a lot of resourcefulness. And so many of you who are on the webinar today will see this as your first step, and hopefully we'll see you down here. But it is challenging, and I think today what we're going to do is outline the steps and give you the framework so you know what's ahead of you. But it is possible. Joe will tell you we're bringing in people all the time, and I think the most significant thing is in this particular time of COVID, where we're still kind of in the throes of it a little bit. Healthcare workers have the red carpet. There are border exemptions, and we've been bringing in healthcare workers for over 2 years now through the border exemption policy, critical work policy. So this is your time to be able to move. Okay, so we're going to be very quick today, 40 minutes, that's all we require. Please type in your questions. We'll try and answer as many as we can. If we can't answer the questions now, then we'll answer them later. We will get back to you. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? Well, first of all, obviously, we'll meet the panelists, which we've done. We'll give an overview of the New Zealand healthcare industry. We'll look at the job market, what's it like right now, and look at the eligibility to move to New Zealand. It's not simple to move to New Zealand. There are sort of visa requirements. You must meet certain criteria. We'll go through that. It's changing a lot. There have been a lot of changes, so we will go through that. we'll look at registration. Registration is absolutely paramount, and you can't move to New Zealand as a healthcare professional without your registration. Joe will take you through that. We'll look at how we can help you find a job. This is what we do. We're called Working In. So finding that job that meets your needs in your location, in your vocation is absolutely critical. So that's where we jump in and help you. And of course, Zinni and her large team assists with the visas assistance and making sure all those things are lined up properly to make sure that you're saving money and time the whole journey. And then we'll just look at the next steps. Hey, what do you need to do now? If this sounds like something you want to do, and as I said, we've helped thousands of people do this over the last 20 years. If you're committed to New Zealand and this is the pathway you want to take, then what do you need to do now to make sure that that actually happens? So let's get stuck in. I'll go straight to Joe, the New Zealand healthcare industry. Can you, Joe, just give us a brief update on the industry, what it's like to work here, because obviously work's a big part of our life. If you're going to be working here, what sort of industry are you going to be working in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. And I've just popped a slide up there, so hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, look, I mean, overall, the feedback I get from all the people that I've helped move to New Zealand is that it really is a great place to work. In fact, you'll see a comment on the slide that's up on the screen. One of the girls that I helped recently, one of the nurses, an ED nurse, has come over to New Zealand and, loving her job. And whilst it's still challenging, she said it's nowhere near as crazy an environment as working in the UK. And in fact, I recall her saying to me in her first couple of weeks how she couldn't believe how they kept forcing her to have her tea break, which was unheard of for her working back in the UK. So I guess that's a little bit representative of the change for her in being able to actually have a busy job, but then be able to, stop and certainly have a cup of tea on the ward. So, but yeah, look, it's a diverse workforce in New Zealand. And I think you'll see here that 42% about are sort of overseas trained, and actually 27% of nurses in New Zealand are overseas trained, which is higher than any other OECD country. And but we also pride ourselves in New Zealand on the high standard of care and the quality of work environment, and also obviously what we find in everyday life as well, which is that positive and really friendly culture. So yeah, in summary, all the feedback and what we hear is a great place to work in New Zealand.
Thanks, Joe. And look, what's happening in the sort of the job market now, obviously with COVID, there's a lot of pressure on the healthcare industry. But, that aside, what's the sort of long-term view in terms of demand? New Zealand, for everyone who's listening, we're great travellers. So there's a thing called the OE here, the overseas experience, and a huge amount of young people in their 20s, they leave New Zealand and they go to the UK or Australia or the US or Canada or wherever it may be just to get their overseas experience. So we do suffer from losses of skilled people. That has been an issue for New Zealand for generations because we're travellers. So that is why we do require skilled people, not just in healthcare, but in all industries. So what does the job market look like for people who are going to start looking, Joe? Yeah.
Well, look, that's absolutely correct. And, not only that, obviously, the rapid population growth, and I'll just pop another visual up here for you. The rapid population growth in New Zealand is meaning, that there's widespread development. There's lots of new expansions going on. We've got new hospitals being built in Christchurch. We've got a new hospital being built in Dunedin. Billions of dollars worth of investment. Existing hospitals adding on operating theatres. Significant investment into the mental health sector. And so all these things are obviously leading to the need for extra skills. And yes, obviously we are growing our own skills in New Zealand, but the growth in the country is meaning that, you know, we do have to look overseas to the global market. And so for nurses and midwives that, you know, have got good experience and some great skills, then there really is quite a significant demand in New Zealand. And that's, you know, there's choices for you as well. You know, do you want to work in a city? Do you want to work in a rural location? And so there's opportunities in different settings: public health and private health, working in a clinic. It really is, you know, there's lots of choice for everybody. You know, a number that we keep hearing is that we need sort of 25,000 nurses by 2030. And so, you know, that's obviously a huge, huge number. So, you know, we're doing our best here in Auckland to provide skills to the industry in New Zealand.
Yeah, true. Look, and you're absolutely right. Our population has grown and is growing, but we're still a country of only 5 million people. And to put that in perspective, the South Island, which is about 1.5 million people, is roughly the size of England. So, you know, reasonably sparsely populated country, 1.5 million people where we live in Auckland, by far and away our biggest city. So yeah, we do have population growth and we do have pressures, and we are building new hospitals, which means new equipment. But at the same time, very low population compared to many countries around the world. Okay, so, you know, are you eligible to migrate? It might seem like it's a slam dunk, but it's not actually. And there's something that's come out of COVID is that our government in particular has made some very, very large changes, arguably the biggest changes we've seen to immigration and immigration policy. And whilst you're still welcome and wanted as a healthcare professional, there are still a lot of hoops that you need to jump through, and it can take quite a bit of time. So look, I think this is a question that both you and Zinni can answer. But first, Jo, you know, without doubt, registration is the start of the process, right?
It is. It's absolutely unavoidable. If you're a nurse or a midwife, then to practice in New Zealand, you have to be registered. So there's no getting around that. And I'll talk a little bit more about registration shortly. But that's what I would encourage everybody to get started on, that registration, because it can take several months to do that. And there's what I should tell you is there's 2 different councils in New Zealand. So if there's people on here from the UK, you'll be used to the fact that there's the Nursing Midwifery Council. In New Zealand, there's the Nursing Council and the Midwifery Council. So they're 2 separate authorities. So look, yeah, registration is kind of the number one thing in terms of being able to assess that you're eligible to migrate. The second thing, obviously, then is getting the job. You know, getting the job is the the next key component, if you will, in terms of being able to get here. And then on to that, the next thing is, once you've got your registration and once you've got the job, then it's about applying for the visa, which also itself obviously has some requirements. And Zinni might want to add a little bit here on that.
Yeah, hi, that's a good idea, Zinni. I mean, so is what Jo's saying is that registration is a compulsory part of not just the job offer, but also the visa? Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the visa process for certain occupations, immigration does require you to have mandatory registration before you can apply for the visa. So that is absolutely the first step. If you're going into a nursing role or a practitioner role, you need to have your registration first. And in a lot of cases, that does take a lot of time. So if you are intending to migrate, do start off doing that. And alongside that, if you're interested in your specific pathway to migrate to New Zealand, so the team here we look at your background. So in the first step in the visa process, so alongside the registration, is you want to find out what is your pathway. So what are the steps that you need to take in terms of, which type of visa to apply for yourself, for your family. I see some questions asking about partner and children. So we look at everything. So we look at yourself, what do you need? And your partner, what do they need? And your children, what do they need as well? So everyone will be very different because it depends on the age of your children as well. Can they study? Can they work? Things like that. So in that first stage, we call it the My Visa path. So you fill in a questionnaire online. It's quite simple. And our licensed immigration advisor here will go through an overview and detail a pathway for you. So what are the next steps that you need to take? Apart from registration, apart from getting a job, what do you require? So that's the sort of information that will help you kickstart your journey. And I think it's very important because there's so much going on at the moment. There's a lot of visa changes. There's the borders being closed. But for health workers specifically, there is still very much a pathway to New Zealand because like Scott and like Joe mentioned, there is such a big need here. So we look at your situation and then we map out what steps that you need to take to come here.
Yeah, and I think, Zinni, the points that you've brought up are really important, and in fact, the most important thing, because what people are doing here is actually right from the get-go, right from the start, understanding what their pathway is, understanding what issues they may have that you need to potentially deal with, and then wrapping some timelines around that, and then understanding how, what the costs might be. For some people, they're thinking, oh, I can get in straight away, but the things that are looked at are things like age of your kids, but it's often the health and the medical and some of these other character stuff that actually gets in the way, and also the qualifications. Where are they from? Do they transfer over? So is that how you see it? That those are the things that can potentially derail an application?
Yeah, definitely. There is a lot of component to the visa application process.
Mm-hmm.
So each application has its own set of requirements. So there's the temporary applications and there's the residence applications. And then in the current situation, there's on top of that, the border exemption process. So there's that requirements for the border exemption as well. In saying that, we have been bringing a lot of health workers over the last 2 years. So it is definitely possible, and very much so for a lot of people that have made the move. So yeah, if you are really thinking of moving now, then do contact us and we'll look at your pathway. We'll look at how you can get your first step into New Zealand, as well as how you can stay on here if you're intending to apply for residence in the future. So we look at the whole thing.
Okay, great. And look, Zinni, just before we jump on and talk to Joe again about the registration as that first part, I just want to highlight this point, because most people will be looking for residence. Let's be fair, you get residency and then 2 years later you gain permanent residency. And there is a pathway to residency through the point system, which many people will be familiar with. But right now we've got a little window, haven't we, with internally we call it RV21. But do you want to explain this, because it's time critical, but there is an opportunity, isn't there, for people who are on this webinar to potentially arrive in New Zealand before July and automatically gain residency. And I think it's a really important point. And can you just explain that, please?
Yeah. So traditionally, most people migrate to New Zealand, and their pathway to residence is through the skilled migrant category. So that is the points-based system. In the last year, the government came out, and I think it's because of the government recognizing there is a skill shortage here in New Zealand, and they want to make the most of skilled people coming into New Zealand and retaining them. So the government has actually created a one-off resident visa category. It's named the 2021 resident visa. And this pathway really is to attract skilled people like yourselves to come to New Zealand. So it's time limited. It's only available up until the 31st of July. But if you are able to gain border entry through the border exemption process on a critical purpose visitor visa, then you as a health worker, you have this direct one-off opportunity to resident. So if you are thinking of moving, this is no better time. This is the time to move, because it's not often at all. Immigration doesn't just create a category to welcome people. It's definitely one-off. And so make the most of the opportunity.
Yeah, look, Zinni, thank you. And to our listeners and viewers, let's just reiterate that if you arrive in New Zealand before July 31st as a healthcare worker, then you have the opportunity to be granted residency in New Zealand. It's a one-off category. I've never seen it before. It's very unlikely to happen again. And so if you're thinking, gosh, I've got to get going, yeah, you got to get going because there is this chance. Okay, so then in order to get going, you've got to start your process. That means registration. Joe, let's get into registration. We're 23 minutes into this. We're wanting to move forward. This is critical.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely critical. You can't, as I said before, you can't practice in New Zealand unless you've got your registration. There's two different registration boards, one for nurses, one for midwives, assuming we are talking to all nurses and midwives here, which is obviously what the webinar is about. And generally speaking, both of those registration boards pretty much have the same requirements to make you eligible. So I'm just going to run through those here, but these can be found actually on the respective websites. But I think it's really important that you kind of reflect on yourself and your own skills and qualifications, and just kind of get a sense of whether you would be eligible for registration. So the first thing is that you need to have a qualification that's comparable to a Bachelor of Nursing or Bachelor of Midwifery, and that's what I say when I say comparable. So comparable to a bachelor if it's not a bachelor. You need to be registered in the country that you're currently practicing. You need to have had at least 2 years post-registration experience. So you've qualified, you've got your registration, you've started work, and you've done 2 years. And you've got to meet the English language requirements. So if you're coming from a country where English isn't the first language, then there's a couple of different tests you can do to make sure that you reach those requirements. You've got to be fit to practice. And so part of that is doing an international criminal history check. And that kind of obviously overlaps as well with your visa, because that's something you need to do for your visa. And then you've got to be competent to practice. So that means that for some countries that are considered to be a non-comparable health system country, it may be that you might need to do what's called a CAPS course or a competency assessment program when you arrive in New Zealand before you can practice as a registered nurse. So that's kind of just an extra step that you might need to do. But as I say, all this information is on the Midwifery Council website or the Nursing Council website. And so do have a look at that, check you're eligible. If you've got your registration, awesome. If you haven't got it yet, do get started. It's a 2-step process and actually can take, 4 to 6 months. So you really need to sort of put that into your time frame of moving.
Thanks, Joe. And I assume in the follow-up emails to this webinar, we'll be able to send out those links so it's easy for people to go straight to those application pages.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, we'll do that.
Yeah. And I think, you've just said 4 to 6 months, which makes it quite tight. But Zinni and Joe, really, I'm going to put this to Joe first, because as I understand it, most of the employers that we talk to want to see that the applicant has committed to at least starting the registration process, because otherwise they're thinking, geez, is this person committed or not? So once you start that process of looking for the job, then you can kind of start the process of the visa, and all these things are moving along concurrently. So it's not linear. You don't have to finish the registration before you find the job, before you get the visa. So otherwise you'd run out of time for the residency 21 visa. So, and I think we can manage all that, but really, Joe, it's important that people understand that once they've applied for their registration, then there are job opportunities. How do you do that? How do you introduce our viewers to employers? How do you make sure that someone offshore is actually considered? Because, in the knowledge that it might be 3-6 months before they arrive.
Absolutely. Look, and it's a really, really good question, because obviously as an international health worker looking to move to New Zealand, then you are potentially competing with applicants in the local market as well. So just because there are skills in the demand in New Zealand doesn't give you immediate, entry into those jobs. It's really important, and I call it getting job ready. And we want to put you in a position where we're giving you the best shot to be considered for that job. And that means that, getting all your ducks in a row and being prepared. So knowing that you are eligible for a visa, getting started on your registration, being clear on, what preferred role you're looking for, what is your skills and expertise, what is going to match your skills in New Zealand, where you might want to live in New Zealand. So, where's going to be your preferred location according to your lifestyle? Do you want to work in the public system? What's your background there, or the private system, or, are you looking for a clinic role? What's your speciality? Do you want to do shift work? Do you not? There's just so many different facets there, and it's really important to have a planned approach. We just don't recommend firing your CV off to lots of random jobs online, because that really doesn't work. It's about really sitting back and taking a considered approach, getting your CV ready, getting it the best it can. And what are the things that we can do for you? And, is we provide full job assistance. And so what that means is, we will basically help you to secure a job. The first thing we do with that is obviously ensure that you are eligible to meet that sort of criteria. And then it's really important that we have a one-on-one consultation with you. So we talk about you and your family independence, if you've got them, and talk about your actual plans, and really talk about putting something personalized together, basically specifically for you. And then once we've done that, we then get into a job search, putting you forward for interviews. We've got relationships all throughout New Zealand. So we've got an extensive network. And what we're doing is we are basically presenting you to decision makers. So we're cutting through all that noise that you would normally find in finding a job, which, you must admit, even if you're doing that in your own local job market, it's quite hard. But if you're trying to do it the other side of the world, you don't know the system, you don't know the environment, you don't necessarily know where you want to work, you've got no networks, etc. So we've got all that. So we're able to, take a really hands-on approach to assisting you, and then managing that whole process in terms of getting you interviews, helping you prepare for interviews, negotiating relocation assistance for you, looking at your contract, and then really just supporting you that whole way through the process, and not just when you start the job. But I'm in contact, I don't know how I manage this, but with all my people that are in New Zealand, and I'm in regular contact, checking how they're going, and some of them still contact me if they've got questions and things like that. So we do really provide a very nurturing and personalised service, and that's what we love. That's what we're about. That's what our business is about.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, I mean, it's interesting, and if our viewers, you just put yourself in the shoes of the hospitals or the healthcare providers for a moment, and because New Zealand's, it's got quite a good reputation at the moment, and because of COVID, a lot of people are wanting to change their lives, and some of these organisations are being flooded by CVs, flooded and flooded and flooded, and it's not unreasonable for them to get a little bit sort of wary, because it's so easy to flick off a CV these days. So what Joe's able to do, from my understanding, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're able to say, well, I've got this nurse or this midwife. They've been through a process. We understand that they can move. They've committed. They've started registration. And therefore you should be interviewing them. And I think that's what you're talking about, the cut through. Otherwise, the employers really don't have the time to understand how committed and how organised or prepared that applicant is.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And they do need to know that you're fully motivated and committed. In fact, I was chatting with Auckland DHB yesterday, and some district health boards will consider you if you haven't got your registration in place, but some won't. And so it's really important, because otherwise there's that sense of what is that time frame when you're going to get here. And so, like I say, again, I can't emphasize enough is getting that registration piece sorted, which will give you, better opportunities.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to stick on that job area a little bit more, because it's such an important factor. But look, we've got to work through, hey, how does the visa work? Because this is where things can really come unstuck quite easily, because you're dealing with a government department, with full respect. But if you get it wrong, there's it can really impact you. And especially with this residency coming up, if you miss that timeline and you miss out on residency just because you've filled in a form incorrectly or haven't done something, then the impacts can cost you a lot of time and money. So Zinni, in terms of visa assistance, can you sort of run through again? I mean, you've talked about that eligibility assessment, that My Visa path, to make sure that people understand, whether they qualify and what they need to do to make sure that they qualify. What happens after that?
Yeah. So part of the My Visa path process, and I can see from the comments that everyone is at different stages of the process. So some of you already have registration, some of you have already done some research, but some of you are this is the first step. So we look at your, where you are at, and we look at the next stage. So in terms of the My Visa path, so we do provide you with a report of, your eligibility, what are potential barriers that could be for you, if you have any health issues, if you have any potential character issues. I see questions about whether age or English is a requirement. So as I mentioned before, it's different for different types of visas, but for specifically work visas, border exemption, and the residence visa 2021, good news, age is not a factor that's been taken into account. But for other categories, if you're not able to make the residence visa 2021, for example, and the skilled migrant category is your pathway to residence, then age is a big factor for that, because it determines the points that you would have. The maximum age is 55 for that specific category. So for some people, you do need to hurry up. You do need to get your ducks in a row and put things in plan if your plan is to come here. So everyone will be very different. But if we have determined that, okay, you have a job, you have registration, now you're on this path, we can apply for that border exemption for you. We do work with the employers as well. So we do work with the DHBs every day, because they are very busy themselves. They don't necessarily know the visa process or want to keep up to date with it. So we work alongside them to sort out your visa, either whether it's border exemption or whether it's the next work visa or residence visa. So there's a lot of factors to be taken into account. So the application is not solely based on information that's required from you, but from other parties as well. And a lot of these is time, like the documents take time to prepare. So police certificate, for example, it could take months for you to obtain if it's from a different country to where you're living at. So preparation is key, and you do want to get started as soon as possible. So even if your plan is not to migrate until later on, at least now you know, okay, I need to get that police certificate. I might have a medical issue that I need to work on, or things like that. Or your children, you want them to come here to study. You need to have a plan in place before you can embark on this journey.
Zinni, look, you've just raised a little point. I just heard you say that. If you've and this is an example of the things that you probably don't know, which will come and bite you if you don't start now. And that is that if you've lived in a country, I think it's for 5 years or more, that's not your country of birth. So let's say you're from the UK, but you went and lived in Singapore for 6 years, then you require a police certificate from Singapore. And so to apply for that police certificate from the UK, to get it from the Singaporean police department, can take months. And these are the sort of thing that massively slows down process. And there's numerous examples of that, not police certificates, but all sorts of qualifications that can really slow things down. So I think the biggest message that, from looking from the outside, because I'm no expert, I'm talking to the experts, is that the sooner you start, the better it is, because the fishhooks that come along are a complete surprise. And once you've done that My Visa Path, Zinni will be able to allude you to what those things are, and I guarantee you'll be surprised. So yeah. I am very aware of the time here, because people have wanting to have their dinner, or want to just sit down and watch some Netflix. So look, can we just move on? Thanks, Zinni. And what's the next steps, Joe? What do people need to do now? And can we just sort of run through sort of a checklist? I know we've got a checklist here.
We do. Hopefully everybody's seeing the checklist now. And look, at the end of the day, you'll see there, I'll just state the words on the slide, is that, our process and how we help you is really to help you minimize your risk and give you the best opportunities and for success. And that's what it's all about. So in terms of what you can really be doing now, if you haven't done any of these things already, is, as we said, check that you meet those standards for professional registration. So we will send you the links to the Nursing Council and Midwifery Council. They've got special, it's easy enough to find. They've got special information for overseas qualified nurses. And get started if you haven't already started on that. Obviously, get your, we can organise getting you a visa eligibility assessment done by one of our licensed immigration advisors. So that then makes you, helps you to understand that you meet all that criteria. And from there, as Zinni was talking about a pathway, we can present to you a pathway that suits your individual needs. Update your CV. It might sound like an obvious one, but a lot of people might have a CV, but it's not up to date. So please do that. Obviously, Zinni and Scott have also talked about, all your personal documents required for visas, but also for your registration. So get all those personal documents in order. Know where they are, dig them out from the back of the cupboard. That's really important. Obviously, we've talked about securing a job and our job assistance. So, one of the key things there is really taking a planned approach to that. And as we've said, we'd love to chat to you about that more and have a consultation with you. There is no charge. I've just looked at some questions on our Q&A, and there's no charge for our recruitment services. But obviously, our fees involved in the visa process and for our individual consultation service. So, but that will all kind of be quoted to in due course. Do some research. If you haven't been to New Zealand, where do you want to live? What sort of lifestyle are you looking for? Be a bit clearer on that. set a bit of a time frame for moving. You know, a year can go like that. So set your time frame, and also think about the cost and understanding the costs of relocating as well. So those are the things that we know come up all the time, and we encourage you to sort of sit down and work through that checklist.
Fantastic. And then the very next step is to complete this online form. I think we're putting that up. It's there for people to click on, and that way we've got, an initial, I guess, summary of who you are and whether on the face of it, it looks as though you meet the criteria. And if you do, then we'll be in contact about taking that next step for that My Visa path. Yes, there is a small fee for that, but the value on it is, it sets your pathway. So, it's incomparable, really. And then who knows, you might be down in New Zealand before July 31st and get residency. If you don't make it before July the 31st, obviously, Zinni, there's still opportunities for residency, isn't there? Just right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, what stage of the process, everyone's different. So there are opportunities, and this is what we do. We look at your situation and we map out your opportunities for you. And I also do want to say that you're all here on this webinar, so you're at the right place, because there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of forums, chat groups, media, and not all information are the correct source of information. So if you are seeking immigration advice, you do have to make sure that you're getting it from a licensed immigration advisor, because we're licensed by the government. Our job is to make sure you have the right source of information. So don't go seeking advice from, Facebook pages or friends or family. They might have their own pathway, but yours might be different to them. So seek tailored advice for yourself, and seek it from a licensed individual or a lawyer.
Fantastic advice there. There's a very important licensed immigration advisors. The whole industry is regulated here in New Zealand to keep you safe and secure and protected. So I guess that's a really good way to finish this off. So look, it is 9:44 a.m. here in Auckland. We've probably gone about 4 minutes over time, so we apologise for that. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure hosting this. We hope to see you in New Zealand. Take that next step, act with urgency, because things take time. And I think when we finish off here, there's going to be a few photos. Some of those photos I've taken, some of them Joe's taken. We're keeping it real, just seeing what our life is like down here in New Zealand if you haven't been here before. So take a minute to look at some of those photos and see how we live. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you down here. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.